Colorado Territory. August 1873, the sun hung heavy over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains when she fell. Keziah Porter's knees buckled beneath her on a narrow trail littered with sharp rocks and dry sage, her swollen belly pulling her forward as she half crumpled, half sat against the dusty incline. Her breath came short, too short. Pain pulsed low in her back, sharp and unrelenting. She pressed her hand to the side of her stomach, willing the baby to stay still, to wait. She was not ready, not alone. The trail was quiet, no riders, no wagons, just wind and sky and the far-off cry of a hawk. She tried to push herself up, but her limbs shook and gave. Her bonnet had fallen back and sweat slid down her temples. Her dress clung damp to her skin. She had walked too far, too fast. She had not eaten since sunrise. There was a stitch in her side that had not let go for over an hour. And then she heard hooves. She turned her head slowly, the world tilting just a little, and saw a lone rider coming up the bend, tan hat pulled low, a rifle slung across his back, and a dappled gray gelding moving steady beneath him. He reined in fast when he saw her, boots hitting the ground before the horse had fully stopped. He dropped to one knee beside her, his voice a low rasp. "You can lean on me." Keziah blinked, confused, her world narrowed to heat and ache and the deep green eyes now inches from hers. His hand hovered, waiting for permission, not grabbing, not pulling, just waiting. Her voice cracked. "I am fine." "You are not," he said simply. She nodded once, and then everything inside her unclenched. She leaned into his chest, her body sagging as if her bones had given up holding her together. He caught her fully, one arm strong around her back, the other bracing her weight. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, quiet. "Let me help." After a long pause, she whispered, "Please." He shifted, easing her down with care, brushing aside a few sharp stones from under her legs. His hands were careful, steady, not lingering. Then he stood and untied a bedroll from his saddle and laid it out beside her. "My name is Orion Jennings," he said, kneeling again. "You are safe," she nodded, breath uneven. "Keziah Porter." He gave a small nod. "How far along are you?" 8 months, her voice caught. "Maybe more." Orion's jaw tightened. "You out here alone?" She looked away. "I had to be." He did not press. Instead, he stood and fetched a canteen and a small cloth parcel from his saddlebag. "Here, water first, then some dried apple and bread." She took the canteen with shaking fingers, drank, then nibbled at the bread like a woman who had not eaten in days. Because she had not. Orion watched her with quiet eyes, his presence calm, solid. He was tall, sun-browned, with a lean build and rough hands that looked like they had known years of work. A scar crossed the bridge of his nose, faded but visible. He looked like he could carry a man twice his size if he had to, or a woman, or a child. "I was heading to La Veta," Keziah said thickly. "I thought I could make it." "That is 2 days south," he said. "You would not have made it 10 more miles in this heat." She looked down, ashamed. "I know." He crouched beside her again. "You got kin down there," she shook her head. "No, just a midwife, someone who might help me have this baby." Orion's brows pulled together. "The father, gone." Her voice was clipped. "He left before I could tell him." He nodded once. No pity in his face, just understanding. "You will not be alone now." Keziah looked at him, surprised. "I have a place," he said. "Small cabin, 2 hours ride west. You can rest there. I will take you. You and the baby will be safe." Her throat tightened. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because a good man ought to help someone who needs it." She blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes. He stood, offered a hand. "Can you ride?" "With help." He lifted her gently, one arm around her waist, guiding her toward his horse. She leaned into him, her body still trembling, but less so now. He mounted first, then pulled her up in front of him, his arms firm around her. The gelding started moving, slow and sure-footed, and Keziah leaned her head back against Orion's shoulder. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to safe. They rode in silence as the ridge sloped downward and the sun dipped low. When they reached the valley floor, the air cooled. The land opened wide before them, cottonwoods lining a shallow stream, dark green meadows stretching to a low forest in the distance. Orion's cabin sat near the trees, smoke curling from the chimney. A small corral held a few chickens. A clothesline swayed with clean linens. He dismounted first, then helped her down slowly, his hands warm around her waist. "Inside," he said gently. "Let us get you settled." She followed him in, blinking against the sudden dimness. The cabin smelled of cedar and something faintly sweet, maybe fresh bread. A rocker sat near the hearth and a ticking clock marked the silence. There was only one bed, but it was wide, with a clean quilt folded at the foot. He pointed. "You take the bed, I will sleep out here." She looked at him. "You live alone," he nodded. "Have for a while." Keziah sank onto the edge of the bed, her body aching. "Rest," Orion said. "If you need anything, call." She watched him turn toward the door, then said, "Thank you." He glanced back, eyes meeting hers. "You are welcome." That night, while the wind blew soft through the cracks in the logs, Keziah lay still in the bed, listening to the quiet rhythm of Orion's footsteps outside. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in months she was not afraid of it. And for the first time since she had been left on that porch back in Kansas, swollen and alone, she believed maybe, just maybe, she might still have a future worth holding on to. The morning light came soft through the east window, pale and cool, stretching long across the worn pine floor. Keziah stirred beneath the quilt, the ache in her hips a dull reminder that her body was nearing its end of waiting. The room held the scent of firewood and something warm, cornmeal, maybe. Her eyes trailed across the rafters, the way the light caught the dust in the air like tiny drifting stars. It was quiet, but not the kind that pressed, more like the kind that allowed space to breathe. She rose slowly, steadying herself with one hand on the bedpost. Her boots had been set neatly by the trunk near the foot of the bed. Someone had left her a basin and pitcher. The water was still cool. Keziah washed her face and neck, then ran her fingers through her tangled curls. The cabin's door stood partly open, letting in the scent of morning frost on wild grass. Outside, a sound of measured chopping drew her gaze. Orion stood by a stump, sleeves rolled, splitting firewood with a practiced rhythm. His coat hung from a peg on the porch rail and his hat shaded his eyes as he worked. He didn't look up when she stepped outside, but he spoke just the same. "There's coffee on the stove. Might be some eggs left if you're quick." She crossed the porch and leaned against the railing, the wood sun warmed under her palm. "You always split wood this early. I like the quiet before the day starts pulling at me." She watched the arc of his axe, the clean snap of wood giving way. "You a rancher?" "No cattle, just a few hens, some barley if the rain's kind." He paused, glancing up at her. "You sleep any?" "A little," kept dreaming of water, moving too fast to cross. He set the axe down and wiped his palms on a cloth from his belt. "Dreams'll tell you what you're holding too tight." She didn't answer. Her eyes followed the edge of the forest where the shadows still clung low to the ground. "There's a root cellar behind the coop," he said. "Plenty stored from last season. You'll eat better here than you did out on that trail." She turned toward him then. "You don't ask many questions. I figure if a person wants to give a truth, they'll give it without being pushed." Keziah looked away, her jaw stiff. "The man who left me, he was a schoolteacher. Back in Lawrence, said he'd marry me before the baby came." Orion didn't speak. He changed his mind. He nodded once, slow. "That's a hard thing to carry." She stepped off the porch, the hem of her dress brushing the grass. "I wasn't running to him. I was trying to get to a woman who helped my aunt deliver her youngest. She's older now, but I thought she might remember me." Orion looked toward the hills. "What was her name?" "Mrs. Ruth Callahan. She used to live near the Spanish Peaks." "I know the name. She lives closer to Cachara Creek now, maybe a day's ride from here." Keziah's breath caught. "Then I wasn't as lost as I thought." "No, just turned a little too soon." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind brushing through the tall grass like a hand smoothing a quilt. "You mind if I help with something?" she asked. "You rest," he said. "That baby's doing enough work for two." "I've rested more in the past day than I have in weeks." He tilted his head. "All right then. There's carrots need pulling before the ground dries out." She followed him to the garden, where a patch of vegetables nestled between a pair of cottonwoods. The soil was rough but well kept, the rows straight. She knelt carefully, hands working the earth, and found the motion steadied her. Orion worked beside her in silence, his hands moving with quiet efficiency. "You always live this far from town?" she asked. "Since I came back from the war." Her hands paused. "Union, Missouri Cavalry," he said. "Volunteered at 19. Came home 5 years later with more ghosts than I left with." She didn't press further. The soil between her fingers was cool and damp, grounding. "I lost 2 brothers," she said finally. "One at Vicksburg, one at Chickamauga." His voice was low. "I'm sorry. So am I." The rest of the morning passed in work and hush. When the sun climbed higher, he brought a bucket of water for the plants and poured her a dipperful to drink. She took it gratefully, their fingers brushing only for a second. Later, they sat beneath the cottonwoods with bread and apple slices between them. The breeze tugged at Orion's hair, and Keziah studied the fine lines around his eyes. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said. "But I never do." "Why not?" He looked toward the ridge. "Peace don't follow you. You have to make it where you stand." That night, after the light had gone and the stars hung low enough to touch, Keziah lay in the bed again, listening to the faint creak of the porch boards as Orion moved once, then stilled. The baby shifted inside her, not with pain but with readiness. A quiet promise had taken root between them, unspoken but steady. Not a rescue, not charity. Just 2 people who had been carrying more than they'd meant to, finding for the first time in a long while that they didn't have to do it alone. The next morning broke with a hush over the land, the sort that arrived just before the wind stirred the trees. Keziah sat on a stool near the hearth, hands resting atop her belly, watching the fire settle from its early blaze into a soft glow. She had slept, but not deeply. The child inside her had turned hard against her ribs again and again through the night, restless as if sensing change close at hand. Orion came in with a bundle of kindling under one arm, his boots leaving damp prints from the dew outside. "Storm coming in from the west," he said, setting the wood beside the stove. "Smells like it'll bring hail." "I never did like thunder," she murmured. He looked over, then knelt to feed the fire. "Used to make my youngest cousin cry. Every time it hit, she'd run under the table and sing to herself." What'd she sing? Whatever came to mind. One time it was just the word pickles over and over. Her father thought it was witchcraft. Keziah gave a low laugh, surprised by it. "You have family nearby," he shook his head once. "They left for Oregon just after the war. Wrote once from Eugene, said the trees there made them feel small in a good way. Haven't heard since." Her fingers curled tighter around her dress. "I sometimes wonder what it'd be like to be part of a family that stayed." "You still can," he said, his voice steady. She didn't answer. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the logs like fingertips. "When did you build this place?" she asked. "Spring after I came back. Took 2 months. Roof leaked through the first winter. I patched it with canvas and prayer. And now it holds, mostly." She stood and moved to the window. The cottonwoods beyond the creek bent with the wind. "What made you stay in this valley?" He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "There's a quiet here that doesn't ask anything of you. I needed that for a while. And now," he looked at her, "now I think quiet's only worth something if you've got someone to sit in it with." The wind howled once, hard and sudden, rattling the shutters. She stepped back, one hand on her side. "You all right?" he asked, already moving toward her. "It's nothing, just tight for a moment." He didn't press. Instead, he crossed to the shelves and took down 2 chipped plates. "I'll make stew. There's elk left from last week." "You all right with onions?" "I'll pick around them." He gave a quiet nod, then handed her a knife. "You can peel the potatoes." They worked without speaking for a time, the rhythm of cutting and stirring filling the space between them. When the food was simmering, she slipped outside to sit on the porch. The air had cooled, clouds rolling over the peaks in thick folds. Orion joined her, sitting on the top step, his knees drawn up, hands clasped loosely. "Did you always want to be a teacher?" he asked. She blinked. I was never one. You speak like one, thoughtful, careful with your words. My father taught me to read early. He was a preacher, not fire and brimstone, just quiet. He believed a woman should have the same books as a man. He sounds like someone I'd have liked. He died when I was 17. After that, I did housekeeping for a family near the river. Not much time for books. What brought you to Lawrence? I thought I could start over. I wanted to be somewhere no one knew my name. He looked at her, his face unreadable. And now, she hesitated. Now I think maybe your name's only as heavy as the people who speak it. He nodded slowly. The wind shifted. A hawk circled above the far ridge, wings stretched wide. I want to help you find Mrs. Callahan, he said. Keziah turned to him. You've already done more than I deserve. That's not how I see it. You're not a burden. She looked down at her hands. Back in Kansas, I was told I'd ruined myself, that no man would want to raise another's child. He said nothing at first, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That child's not a ruin, and neither are you. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something slow and deep and growing. A low rumble echoed from the mountains. She flinched just slightly. He stood and offered a hand. Come inside. I'll bar the shutters. She took it, letting her fingers settle into his palm. Later, as rain tapped against the roof and the stew warmed the room, she sat at the table and watched him mend a shirt by lamplight. His stitches were uneven but careful. Did you always know how to sew? She asked. Learned in the army. No one else wanted to fix torn sleeves. You do it like someone who's thinking about something else. I was. What about? He looked up. What'd it be like if you stayed? She didn't speak right away. Then, quiet as breath, she said, I was thinking the same. The lamp flickered. Rain carried on, steady and sure, and for the first time in years, the storm outside didn't feel like something to fear. By the following afternoon, the storm had passed, leaving the land rinsed and quiet. The ground steamed in places where the sun touched it, and the air carried the sharp scent of pine needles and wet earth. Keziah stood with her back to the cabin, a woven shawl drawn around her shoulders, watching the creek swell and settle below the rise. The baby was low now. She could feel it in the way she moved slower, heavier, like her body was counting down to something it already understood. Behind her, Orion was repairing the saddle cinch that had frayed during his last ride into the hills. His hands worked with a calm steadiness, the kind that came from knowing how long something ought to take and not rushing past it. When you were a boy, she said, eyes on the creek, what did you think your life would be? He didn't look up. Didn't think that far. Mostly I just wanted to make it through winter without losing the stock. My father wasn't one for dreaming. Mine was, she said. He used to look out at the prairie and say the sky was God's handwriting. Orion paused, the strip of leather still in his hand. Did you believe him? I did once. Now I think maybe the sky doesn't promise anything. It just listens. He set the cinch aside and stood. You ever want to leave Kansas before? She turned, her expression unreadable. I wanted to, but I stayed out of duty. Then one morning I woke up and realized duty wasn't the same as belonging. He nodded, then brushed his hands clean on his trousers. I've thought about going north. The Black Hills, maybe. Timber's thicker there, water's clean. Why didn't you? He looked past her toward the horizon. Because nothing ever felt worth starting over for. She didn't answer, but her silence pulled at something in him. He stepped closer, voice quiet. You don't need to decide anything now, but if you want a place that doesn't ask for anything more than what you've already given. This land's wide enough for that. She met his eyes. And you? I'm not asking for anything either, just offering what I've got. Her face softened and she nodded once. Then her hand flew to her belly. He reached her in 2 strides. Tell me. It's not sharp, just strong. Like it's beginning. He steadied her with one hand at her elbow. We'll stay here. No sense trying to ride anywhere now. She exhaled slowly, pressing her palm flat against her stomach. I think it's time. They moved together without words. He laid fresh linens on the bed and stoked the fire higher. She filled the basin with warmed water, her fingers trembling only slightly. He brought in the kettle, then turned to her. I'll be close, he said. Call when you need me. She nodded, one hand on the wall as another wave of pressure moved through her. The hours passed in fragments. Keziah's breath came hard, her eyes closed more often than open, her voice low and focused. Orion stayed just beyond the door, pacing the porch, ears tuned to every sound from inside. Once he brought her a mug of boiled willow bark to ease the pain. She took it without speaking, her fingers brushing his just briefly. By dusk, her cries had grown hoarse, but they were no longer panicked. They were steady, purposeful. Then, just after the last light faded from the sky, the cabin fell silent. Orion waited. A minute passed. Then, too, the door creaked when he pushed it open. She was sitting upright, the baby wrapped against her chest in soft flannel. Her hair clung damp to her neck and her eyes were tired but full of something fiercer than triumph. "It's a girl," she said. He stepped inside, hat in hand. "She all right?" "She's strong," Keziah said. "Just like she needed to be." Orion crossed the room slowly, kneeling beside the bed. The firelight caught on the baby's tiny fingers, curled against her mother's collarbone. Keziah looked at him. "Would you hold her?" He hesitated. "You sure? She ought to know who brought us here." He took the child carefully, his arms practiced despite the years since he'd last held anyone so small. The baby blinked once, then settled against his chest. "She's got your mouth," he said. Keziah smiled faintly. "And you're quiet." He looked at her, something steady in his expression. "Have you thought of her name?" "Clara," she said. "It was my mother's." He nodded. "It suits her." She leaned back against the pillows, watching them. "I never thought I'd be here." "Like this?" He glanced down at the child, then back at her. "Sometimes the trail we end up on ain't the one we started. Doesn't make it less true." Keziah's eyes filled not with sorrow, but something older, deeper. "I want to stay." He didn't answer at first. Just looked at her, then the baby, then back. "I'd like that," he said. She reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. The fire burned low. Outside, the wind had stilled. Inside, the cabin held the three of them like a shelter built for just this moment. And when Keziah closed her eyes, Clara warm against her skin, Orion's hand in hers, she felt it down to her bones. She wasn't waiting anymore, she'd arrived. The last of the snow melted into the creek by early April, leaving behind a softened world, pale green shoots pushing up through the thawed soil. Orion stood at the edge of the corral, adjusting the gate latch he'd carved from cedar. Clara lay swaddled against Keziah's chest, her tiny hand curled into the folds of her mother's shawl. "She's heavier," Orion said, glancing over. Keziah adjusted Clara's position and kissed the crown of her head. "She's eating more, sleeps less." "She's watchful," he said. "Like she's already studying how everything works. She'll take after you then." He didn't answer right away. A magpie called from the grove behind them. "You've settled into this place," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd want to." Keziah leaned against the porch rail. "I didn't know what I wanted until I wasn't alone." Orion gave a quiet nod. "I've been thinking about that pasture east of the creek. It's flat enough for another structure." She raised a brow. "What kind of structure?" "A schoolhouse. Not much, just 4 walls, a stove, and a bell. There's a few kids along the valley. Closest school's 3 days west." Keziah shifted Clara to her other shoulder. "You think they'd come?" "I think they'd ride twice that if someone like you was teaching their children." She gazed toward the line where the grass met the trees. "I never thought I'd be given something to build that wasn't just survival." "There's more than one kind of life out here," he said. "Some folks just never get the chance to choose it." She looked down at Clara. "I want her to grow up in a place where she sees women doing more than stitching and bearing. I want her to see that her life can be made with her own hands." "Then we'll build that kind of place," Orion said. They didn't speak for a long time. The wind moved through the tall grass, rustling the stalks like water. Clara stirred, then settled again. That evening, Orion brought in a wrapped parcel, cloth-worn but clean. He laid it on the table and unwrapped it slowly. Keziah stepped closer. Inside lay a finely carved wooden box, polished dark with age. "It was my mother's," he said. "She kept her letters in it. I found it again last winter under the old floorboards in the shed." Keziah traced the edge with her fingertip. "Why give it to me? I thought maybe if you were writing again or teaching you might want a place to keep the things that matter." She opened the lid. Inside, he'd placed a small stack of thick paper, a bottle of ink, and a pen with a carefully whittled grip. "I haven't written anything in years," she said. "You might again." She folded the cloth over the box and held it to her chest. "You're not the kind of man who gives gifts lightly." "No," he said, "but I know what it means to carry something too long alone." Spring turned richer. The trees thickened with new leaves, and the creek softened to a murmur. Keziah planted rows of cabbage and beans while Orion repaired the fence that bordered the north slope. Clara gurgled from a basket nearby, her eyes following every sound. In May, they rode to see Mrs. Callahan. The woman was slower now, her hands stiff with age, but her mind sharp as ever. She examined Clara's eyes, her posture, her grip, then looked Keziah square in the face. "You did right," she said. "She's strong, you'll raise her well." They stayed 2 nights. Mrs. Callahan showed Keziah how to prepare a poultice from bee balm and crushed pine tips, and how to ease teething pain with clove. Orion chopped wood while the women spoke. On the last morning, the older woman handed Keziah a small leather-bound journal. "Write what you learn," she said. "So the next woman doesn't have to start from nothing." When they returned, Clara clapped her hands at the sight of the cabin. Orion laughed and lifted her high, spinning her once before setting her back in her mother's arms. That night, Keziah sat beside him on the porch, the stars spread wide above them. "I want to marry you," Orion said, his voice even. She looked over, lips parting slightly. "I don't want to wait," he added. "Not because of duty, not because of the child, because I love you. Because you're the strongest thing I've ever known." She didn't answer right away. Then she turned and laid her hand over his. "I want that too," she said. They married a week later. Mrs. Callahan came, riding in with a neighbor boy to guide her horse. The vows were said in the clearing behind the cabin, with the creek singing nearby and the cottonwoods swaying gently. Clara gurgled in Keziah's arms as Orion spoke his promise. "I'll never ask you to be anything but what you are," he said. "And I'll stand beside you to make space for all you choose to become." When it was Keziah's turn, she took his hands and said, "You didn't rescue me, you saw me, and you stayed. That's a kind of love I didn't know existed until you." They kissed with the trees behind them and the sky wide above, the kind of kiss that wasn't hurried but certain. A kiss that felt like home. The schoolhouse was finished by August. Orion laid the last shingle, and Keziah painted the door a soft, warm brown. By autumn, 5 children sat at the desks he'd carved by hand, their slates resting on polished pine boards, their voices echoing with lessons under Keziah's careful guidance. Clara watched from the back corner, her small body swaying with contentment in her cradle. Orion rode fence lines and planted winter rye. Some evenings, he sat in the back of the schoolhouse while Keziah read aloud from a book of poetry. He didn't always understand the words, but he liked the way her voice softened when she spoke them. They grew together, their days shaped by work and shared glances and quiet meals. They never forgot the weight of what had come before, but they no longer carried it alone. Years passed gently. Clara grew tall and sure-footed, her laugh echoing across the fields. She learned to ride before her 7th birthday, and by her 10th, she'd read every book in the schoolhouse twice. Keziah taught her to write with care, and Orion taught her how to listen to the land. Every spring, the cottonwoods bloomed again. Every winter, the fire burned steady in their hearth, and every night, no matter the season, Orion reached for Keziah's hand before sleep, and she held it like an anchor. Their life was not grand, but it was whole, and it was theirs.